I actually grew up in Victoria, moved away to Europe, went to school over there, moved back to Vancouver, and ended up down here in San Diego, where I've been for the last 12 years, actually with a company that I spent most of my career, first part of my career with, about 14 years, the Active Network. And we went from 30 million to over 500 million, IPO'd, got taken private by Vista. So spent a couple of years running the Vista playbook, which is a different motion, and then spent the last 3 years scaling ChargeBee, which we'll talk about, and then have just recently joined a new company, Payrix, which is a PayFac as a service provider, which we'll talk about as a little bit. So going to cover off a little bit about the ChargeBee journey to add some context in kind of what we went through over the last 3 years. And then the other part of the presentation is around kind of some of the growth levers that we were able to pull on to help do that scale and motion with them. I'll preface that there's really no one straight route for scaling. It's a personal journey for each company and their experience. And a lot of the leadership efforts when you're scaling businesses like this is moving people's attention away from kind of present day thinking to how great things are going to be in the future, because scaling's messy and it's hard. And then what we've learned is that cross-functional execution can become a blocker really early. And a lot of the learnings that we had was ruthless prioritization, regardless of how much capital and employees you have, is critical to continue on that growth clip. So a little bit about the ChargeBee journey here. So when I started with them, it was January, February of 2020. So the project brief I got was, hey, we're 17, 18 million in ARR. It was 100% inbound sales motion. Company was founded out of India. So 100% kind of inside sales, if you like, inbound sales motion. There was about a half a dozen people in the US, half of which were GTM, and then everybody else was based out of India. But they'd scaled to a pretty good clip, 2,500 customers, 3 billion in processing volume, about 300 employees. And so the project brief was, hey, we need to move up market, introduce an outbound sales motion, unified sales organization and revenue machine globally. And then the pandemic hit and we shut that down and we did it all behind Zoom. So kind of fast forward, into 2023, and we'd got up to 5,000 customers, 12 billion in processing volume, 1,200 employees. We'd raised an additional 430 million in capital, and the valuation of the business jumped to about 3.5 billion. The employee footprint, there's 150 people in the US now. We went from 0 to 100 people in Amsterdam to run the European operations out of there. And interestingly enough, the revenue split is kind of 50% North America, 40% Europe, and 10% APAC. So a little heavily skewed internationally, but that's just kind of where we were born out of. So, in that process, we brought 2 new investors, Sapphire and Sequoia, on and continued to scale. We made three acquisitions for product augmentation, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of the lessons that we learned on the multi-product strategy of scaling. And so quick view into the next adventure for me. So I just joined Payrix, which is an embedded payment solution. So a PayFac as a service, as you like. So working with clients like ChargeBee to help them, embed payments into their experience, grab that revenue share, increase the stickiness of their platform to these clients. Interestingly enough, it's a 9-figure business growing at 100% year over year. And I'll talk a little bit later on about why that's unique. And the project brief's very similar. Revenue officer coming in, synchronizing and scaling the organization, building a predictable and scalable sales operation globally. Sales and marketing, a lot of newness. FIS WorldPay bought these guys about a year ago. And so there's a lot of new leadership being put around it. There's a multi-product strategy to execute on, and then global expansion into Australia and Europe and the UK. So that's the new adventure I'm on, that I'll hopefully be pulling a lot of these strategies that we executed on at ChargeBee into this next venture. So jumping into the levers, there's 4 or 5, there's multiple levers, as I mentioned at the beginning. Everybody's kind of journeys unique to their own businesses and the context of their business. But, market and geo expansion is typically a common strategy that's as you evolve, you get product market fit. Maybe you're just playing around in North America, you inevitably move into expanding into different markets or geos. And sometimes you're pulled there. Sometimes there's just obvious adjacencies that you can see that make that that step into it more clear. At ChargeBee, given the volume of inbound that we get, like a lot of the things that we started doing when we were looking at geo expansion was looking at the signals that we already had in our data set. Because we had such an inbound motion, we could see where everybody was searching from. We had clients that were signing up in, Hong Kong, just places that we weren't focused. But so we could see concentrations in just the signals that we were getting in the data of where, it would make sense if we were to expand geographically where we would go. And then we looked at, we had a massive partner ecosystem. So again, did a lot of processing volume and had native integrations to a lot of the payment processors, Stripe, Adyen, Braintree. And so we were looking where, all of them had started setting up shop and where they were seeing traction. And then obviously where the competitors were headquartering as well. And that started giving us directionally where we knew we wanted to go. And there's a lot into go into market. We were fortunate enough to be able to contract with Bain to do some analysis for us, and I'll show you a template that we worked through with them, and then also a go-to-market template that we designed in when we decided where we wanted to go, how we were going to go there. So this is once we kind of gathered our data internally, directionally figured out we kind of knew where we wanted to go, and then we got into a deep analysis into two buckets, right? Really market attractiveness and ability to win. They were weighted, and you can see the various sides. How big was the market? What's the willingness in that market to use a third-party solution? Local teams, what the product requirements are, and all of those were weighted, and it started kind of giving us directionally some weighting into each of the markets. And so we would do one of these sheets for Brazil, for Japan, for India, for Singapore. And then at the end, we'd kind of come up with a weighting and prioritization of which markets to go to. We had at that time were selling into North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, which was really Australia and New Zealand. India was one of the first markets that we picked to go. Massive presence there, big operations. We knew the market and the nuances of the market. Low barrier to entry, big brand recognition, only a couple product enhancements that we needed to make and to execute there. So that was one of the actual first markets that we went into. But we developed this kind of go-to-market strategy, which is cross-functional and on each of the markets that we wanted to go into. And, quite frank, it's obvious, but product is typically the long pole in the tent. So we stumbled a couple times. Had a timeline everybody was working towards. Marketing and sales started standing up the sales team, and then all of a sudden there was a 3 or 4 month product delay. So we had a bunch of, resources sitting there that weren't ready to go. So, always letting product and engineering drive the timeline and adding in sufficient buffer was some lessons learned when we went into India as well as Israel. So template that you guys can use. So diversifying acquisition channels. So as I mentioned, when I started with ChargeBee, 100% inbound. So we had to stand up an outbound motion, totally different. The marketing team had never done outbound marketing. It was all digital, demand generation to drive inbound motions, like doing an outbound email marketing campaign. We didn't have the expertise to do. We didn't have a database to go after. It turned out, funnily enough, that after all the inbound demand gen that we've been doing, we were sitting on a database of 200,000 accounts and leads that nobody had done anything about, but a brand new motion. Like, how does the ABM start with sales and marketing? We stood up a BDR team as well. And then so we were doing inbound, outbound, and then the partnership channel was the other channel that typically kind of you start heating up as you get bigger as well, depending on the nature of your solution. One of the things that that's interesting as you start scaling like this and introducing these new motions, going into market segments and verticals, is your product market fit is going to change, even going up market in the same market that you're serving. So we were doing B2B SaaS, going from a $10 million company to targeting $100 million company, very different, unique needs from one, how you interact with them, how they buy, and then just product requirements. So at 100 million, those companies are starting to think about getting pubco readiness, thinking about IPOing, the reporting. Some of the requirements are really different. So your product market fit is going to shift, even in the same market, if you like. As you move up market into higher segments, it's going to change, and so you need to be aware of that. And what I love this Science of Scaling by Mark Roberge. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you. It's great. He talks about the science of scaling, and the first being product market fit. And product market fit is really best determined, as he really alludes to well, by customer retention. The challenge with customer retention is it's a lagging indicator. So you got to figure out what that aha moment is that makes you sticky. Like at ChargeBee, we knew as soon as someone processed $1 on our platform, our retention rate skyrocketed. Some other examples of that is like Slack was using 70% of their customer from an organization sending 2,000 messages. They knew they had stickiness. Dropbox, 85% of the customers uploading one file within an hour. So there's different aha moments that can kind of precede that, lagging indicator of retention, but that's really when you have product market fit. And then second stage is go-to-market fit. And at this stage, you're really looking for strong unit economics, right? Your CAC to LTV, ARR, month over month growth, and looking for that before you step into the growth and moat, which is really, really scaling when you've got product market fit, go-to-market fit. Now you're moving into true scale, which you have to pace out and monitor as well, because that product market fit is going to shift as you scale. The other thing is focusing on the right metrics. And this sounds a little weird, but each strategy has a different set of metrics that you should be managing to. They're not all built the same. So yes, there's a common set of metrics that SaaS businesses specifically look at, but some are more important than others based on the strategy that you're trying to employ. So here's a core set of standard metrics. And what I mean by focusing on the right metrics is if I'm optimizing for logo acquisition, market share, then maximizing my ARR or ACV may not be that important out of the gate. And so I want to make sure that whatever my strategy is, I'm measuring the right North Star metric. Conversely, the other thing that we started to get into as we were scaling was NRR. So net revenue retention, which is a calculation of, how much revenue you're losing versus how much you're upselling and expanding your customer base by. Best in class is like 120, 125%. But HubSpot was great at this, actually. One of the things that they did, and one of the things that we've started employing over the last couple of years is actually not optimizing for maximum ACV at the point of sale and leaving money on the table. And that has a whole bunch of connotations to how you incentivize your sales reps, because what we didn't want to do when we started implementing multiple products was start anywhere, go everywhere. Sell them a product that could only be $10,000 in the beginning versus the $50,000 billing, and then expand later, which would ultimately, increase our NRR. And so we needed to change up the behavior and the comp plan and incentive plan based on that, that strategy of optimizing NRR versus, ARR growth, for example. And the other thing is these North Star metrics for businesses change as you scale. This is a great example from Bessemer Venture Partners about, this is ARR, best in class growth. It's interesting at the 10 to 50, 100% year over year is great. Well, at 100 million, that's actually really hard, right? Best is, best 60, best in class is 80, 60% is really good. But you can see how, what you're benchmarking against is going to change as you scale. And this is an example of the ARR. NRR is the same as well. So another one that we spent a lot of time on at ChargeBee and actually promoting with our customers is just pricing experimentation. There's a lot that goes into pricing, pricing strategy, marketing attributes, your brand positioning, product attributes, consumer demand, what the competition's like, economic trends, all those go into pricing strategies. But we were continuously experimenting. One example is, we serve customers from 0 to 1 million, 1 to 50, 50 to 200 million. So we'd pick different segments and regions and try different pricing strategies out. So at the lower end in that segment, what we were really looking to do is accelerate logo acquisition. And so we really looked into like, where are the biggest friction points for those smaller customers, and pricing was a big one. And so we removed it. We gave them, at first, we just gave them 6 months free, and we basically 3x the logo count in a quarter. We went from doing, 150 logos to 450 logos in that one segment by removing some of those barriers. And then we swapped tacks and said, you know what, we want to try usage-based billing, and experimented with that. So we were constantly experimenting. And we had a customer, Skinny Tabs, that was in the direct to consumer. They would do pricing experimentation on a daily basis. We internally had, somebody, we were fortunate, that actually came from the airline industry, that was our pricing strategist. We had a pricing committee. And so we would be meeting every 2 weeks, talking about different strategies and experiments that we wanted to do, running modeling on them, throwing them out and A/B testing them in contained environments, so we didn't, totally cannibalize our other parts. So a really good habit to get into, and you need a platform and a tool set to be able to quickly do this as well. Experiment, quickly deploy, get the data back, refine, and go. Multi-product, I thought I'd throw this in here as well. Not everybody's going to get there right away, but there's a lot that gets into multi-product. There's typically growth avenues that everybody goes down. You're going to start going into new geos, new verticals. Then you're going to start, potentially a channel partnership, indirect revenue stream, if that's kind of conducive to your business. And then you're going to start layering on products, whether it's partnered products, or you're building new products, you're buying new products. We acquired 3 companies at once, and each company and each product set was at a different stage and required a different strategy. And so what I mean by that is we bought an AR collections tool, which was only launched in India. It wasn't ready for the US, European market. A lot of development to do there, fairly simple. And then we bought a revenue recognition tool, which was highly complicated, technical from an accounting perspective, and a churn deflection tool. And the churn deflection tool was super simple. And so I could take that product, I could give it to my existing sales team, get it into their workflow, easy to understand. Enablement was key. And so that was what we call a fold-in strategy. And then with the revenue recognition tool, which is far more complicated and required really technical accounting skills, we actually deployed an overlay team on top of our sales organization that basically sold that in conjunction with the rep and the deals. And then you're looking for how you cross-sell and upsell these multi-products, and it gets really complicated pretty quickly. And like our product market fit was different on each of those products. Our go-to-market motion was more mature on each of those products, and that really dictated different strategies and how we deployed them. Scaling's hard, and the organization is going to shift. And I think my former CEO had this great turn of phrase about making sure leaders are comfortable giving their Lego blocks away. So I was running everything as we were scaling, and at one point we brought a chief customer officer in, and they were going to take care of implementation and support, and really everything post-sales. Well, I had customer success, and we split customer success. I kept the revenue generating account managers and gave the customer success team of 60 people backed in, because it made sense. A lot of the friction points with customer success was really between implementation and support, and the handoffs between the two. Market segmentation and ICP are critical. Channel diversity are going to be important at the different stages. Your tech stack can be an inhibitor to growth plan, so paying attention to that early. And then one of the big things that we learned as well, and we tripped up a lot on, was making sure the functions are scaling in unison. Like, we'd get the salespeople going up market really quickly, and then an implementation team that didn't have the skills to deliver those complex projects and serve the needs of a more sophisticated CFO that just had maybe it was an SAP implementation or Oracle implementation or a NetSuite versus a QuickBooks and a Xero. Their expectations are very different. And then ruthless prioritization. We would sit around and think that we had the prioritization nailed down to 3-5 core initiatives, and then you get into the product or an organization and they had 85 number one priorities. And so that ruthless prioritization is a continuous effort, regardless of whatever size you are. And I'll stop there.
The first one here I see from Stuart Rogers regarding pricing experimentation. Did you have to deal with different price points for different markets? If so, did you have to deal with a public pricing page? Any best practices on dealing with either of those?
Yeah, we did. Absolutely. And, you can take a couple different tacks on that. And that's why that pricing has a lot of elements to it. So India was a great example of, if you think about one of the reasons interestingly enough, Indian-born company never sold into India until about a year and a half ago for the exact reason that the market wasn't ready. The B2B ecosystem in India, if you go back 5 or 10 years, was fairly immature. If you go to SaaStr now, massive amounts of SaaS companies being born and built out of India. So real scale in the market, and we were ready to go. And we actually made a conscious decision when we went into India. The advice that we got typically going into India is you have to cut your price by about 40, 50 points to be competitive. We actually maintained our price point in India to go in as a premium provider because there was some competitors in there that were low price point providers that we really wanted to differentiate ourselves from. So our first foray into India was actually to keep our price points very similar to what we were offering, obviously with a currency conversion to be the premium price provider. Now, we launched like that, but we did started tweaking because we wanted to get more adoption. So we started kind of tweaking it to a little bit more market favorable price points in there. But yeah, absolutely. I think you need to kind of play around with that. There's a lot of value in having, consistent pricing. We have consistent pricing across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, just in different currencies.
Awesome. Thanks, Stuart. Laura has a question in the chat. How do you know when you're ready for geo expansion? Do you need to have product market fit first in the country you're based in?
Yeah, this is a great, and this is something we're living and breathing right now. And on my new adventure, like we are, chomping at the bit to get international. We actually bought a company down in Brisbane, so we have an operation down there to get product market fit there. But we have some product enhancements to do to go into the UK, for example. And, one of the things that we're doing is we're backing off that strategy for a couple different reasons. One, we want to make sure that we've got solid footing here in the US. Product market fit's great in the US, but our actually, if you go back to that slide, there was product market fit and go to market fit. And one of the things that we actually don't have dialed in right now, which is kind of why it's exciting to join this company, even though they're as big as they are, their maturity on the on the sales side doesn't quite match the scale of the business, interestingly enough. And so we're actually really honing in our GTM fit in the US. And it's not going to take as long, a few months to get that dialed down. So we have a consistent and repeatable process that we can then take to the other market to complement the product market fit, the GTM fit. You want to make sure both of those motions are solid and scalable and repeatable before you start expanding in different markets or verticals, quite frankly.
That's great. Got another question here from Deepak. In the phase 3 growth and moat, were there any challenges in maintaining and growing the moat? How did you deal with competition?
Yeah, this is a great one. So, we talked about this a lot at the board level. In ChargeBee's example, we were scaling extremely fast and going up market really quickly. When I got there, we were targeting customers that were like, our big customers were like 10, 15 million. By the time I left, we were targeting customers that had ARR of 500 million. We just landed Bloomberg. We were going after some massive customers. The problem is it starts stretching the whole organization, including the product. And so when you think about that defensive moat, what we were worried about was always where somebody was going to really come and eat our lunch was coming up through our startup segment, the really young segment. So we had to make sure that we were continuously thinking about strategic defensive mechanisms and making sure we were best in class down at the startup side, the entry level, even though we were chasing that. And that was a constant push and pull. And there was, different schools of thought where you can't do both, you can do both. Really hard, especially hard from the product side.
That's great. Well, I'll encourage the audience, feel free to keep dropping them in the chat. I had a question for you, Adam. you have an interesting role, CRO. So, and it's not a role that all companies kind of have in place. So I wanted to understand kind of what are the key responsibilities for a chief revenue officer, and how does that distinguish or interplay with like the role of, for instance, like a VP of sales? What do you focus on within organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, probably the easiest way to sum up kind of the chief revenue officer role and how it's kind of different than sales is it's really designed to scale and synchronize all the revenue functions, you know, systems, process, and metrics across the whole, the whole organization and all the revenue streams, and really aligning that kind of go-to-market strategy to ensure there's a cross-functional revenue generation process that aligns with the customer's buying journey, right? And optimizes the customer experience across all those different points, because they're different, right? The new sale, you know, then you get into land and expand. You're working with customer success and account management. And so it's aligning all those revenue streams, matching it up with the customer journey. And then, you know, really just ensuring, you know, the revenue and profitability commitment to the organization as a whole. Because there's different strategies that you can employ across that, you know, those different revenue streams. We talked about NRR, like I'm going to leave money on the table at the point of sale, change my comp plan up there, and I'm going to beef up my land and expand efforts to really drive that NRR. That's an example of kind of that, you know, synchronization of different strategies across the revenue continuum, if you like.
Definitely. So you're kind of the mastermind at play.
I don't know that. There's a lot more smart people than me, but it's coordination, right? Getting everybody running in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know in the session kind of description, we talked about kind of systems and processes needed. So you can't, you know, deploy that plan unless you have the functional elements in place within the organization. Are there, you know, systems and processes that are really critical to allow a company to scale up that you would kind of point to that you think are critical?
Yeah, absolutely. And we, you know, I know we scooted through a lot of those slides by design, just so you know, that was intentional to have a leave behind chunky slides. But yeah, there are, like, I think about, you know, using real world examples, right? Like we, you know, that idea of going up market and introducing an outbound, like we didn't have the right systems to execute on an outbound motion. We didn't have a BDR. Like we had an inbound, our SDRs were triaging inbound leads. So we had to implement a whole outbound motion. That outbound motion actually required a different, you know, set of processes and tools. I needed, you know, 6 Sense in marketing to get more, you know, buy propensity signals coming back into the business that we, you know, is always good to have, but super important when you're going on outbound, so you can start driving this concept of lead scoring. We weren't lead scoring because everything was inbound. They'd raise their hand, they said they want to buy. So now I need, you know, Sales Loft. I needed, you know, a place that BDRs could set up cadences and we could track there. So yeah, there are different processes for sure. And then how do you get, you know, if you think about ABM, which is account-based marketing process between marketing and sales, if you're good, now you're going to start saying, okay, marketing, you're going to start driving outbound marketing efforts. I need those signals to come back in to the BDR team when somebody's kind of, you know, starting to interact or, you know, getting a higher propensity to buy score. So the BDR knows, hey, you know, Erica was just interacting with this piece of content on LinkedIn and she'd seen these, ripe for a call. So those systems and processes, very unique to that outbound motion, you know, and then you got to complement it with the inbound. And I think I mentioned the tech stack can get limiting really quickly. You know, we were stuck on a CRM that was really limiting our growth, and it was hard to change for a variety of different reasons. But, you know, that we were having to build a ton of workaround and a ton of effort. So yeah, I mean, I think that leans into the other thing, that it's never too early to start your revenue operations and enablement team, like right out of the gate. You know, there's a ton of data that small companies, you know, even if you've got small sales organizations, are generating a ton of data. There's a lot of, you know, efficiencies and productivity gains to be had by somebody that's kind of sweating over all that operational data, how everything's set up. And then enablement is critical as well. Like just that training and enablement continuously are both key functions that, especially as you start kind of getting, okay, like, hey, we got product market, go to market fit, we're 10 million, we're going to, put the pedal down like we were doing on ChargeBee around 15. They're like, hey, we're going to 100. At that point, you're going to start onboarding mass amounts of people into the organization. How do you onboard them? So that enablement and RevOps piece is critical.
Great, thank you.
Long-winded answer.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you. And I mean, you've alluded to it, but there's obviously growing pains. But I'm curious if you could share with us if there's any kind of growing pains you've had in your experience, like whether that was on talent or capital. How did you deal with some of those challenges? Maybe you could share a story with us.
Yeah, lots of challenges that continue to, you're constantly evolving and learning. One of the things is that kind of cross-functional execution in unison. When I got to ChargeBee, my pre-sales team were doing the implementations. And so we're like, hey, that can't work. We're going to go up market. We're going to have to get more sophisticated. And we started kind of getting too far away from the implementation capabilities with the size of projects that we were bringing in. And that can have a disastrous effect if that kind of doesn't get solved really quickly. Reputational, time to value for the customers were taking longer because we were taking longer to implement and drive those. So that was a big, a huge problem that we had to solve for and slow down a little bit on. ICP really comes into that to make sure that the ICP can get implemented. That was one. If you go back a couple of years, like when we were scaling really fast, we raised, as you saw on the ChargeBee side, a ton of money. And it was like, how can you spend this money as fast as possible? Scale as fast. That was the MO, right? You go back 18, 24 months, that was what we did. So we were starting to scale the sales team beyond the organization's ability to absorb. And, the one mistake that we did, we thought we were being super clever. We got the plan to hire all these people and we had staggered it out. So I remember I mentioned in that Mark Robert's model about scaling pacing. So we had paced it out, planned it out that we were going to pace quarter over quarter throughout the year. And then as we got into the year, we thought, what? Why don't we just front end the whole thing, because everybody will ramp faster and we'll get productivity faster. And you can see on our charts, like our sales efficiency and productivity tanked like by 30 basis points. And so great, we have more people, but we were 40% less productive with those people. And that was a real problem, especially as you started, then the whole world changed on us and everything was about sales efficiency and productivity. And so we had a lot of work to bring ourselves back up to the levels where we already were. So that was a mistake that we made. We thought we were being clever, but no.
I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of our startups on the call. And so, I mean, you've shared so much already, but I don't know if you have kind of words of advice you wish you'd been given a bit earlier in your career, or some kind of encouragement or advice you'd like to share. But I'd welcome you to kind of share your thoughts with these folks who might be kind of at early stages but have big ambitions.
Yeah, great. I think I put that into the context of what we were just talking to. Kind of the world's changed a lot for everybody, regardless of what size you are. When a lot of my focus right now is like, how do I drive sales efficiency back into the business? Sales efficiency, productivity, these business cycles, they're cyclical. What I keep telling my team is like the fundamentals of our business haven't changed. You do have to adapt to where your customers are and what's top of mind for them. So adjusting messaging and positioning to kind of meet the changing needs of how your customers' businesses are evolving in the changing environment is important. I would also say, I did a podcast a little while ago to somebody that runs events, and they were saying, look, the CFO is more involved in the procurement process of everything now. Like when times get tight, they start kind of leaning in a little bit more. So you've got to be aware of that. There's a difference of selling to and selling through CFOs. So in ChargeBee, the CFO was one of our core buyer personas. So we're used to selling to them, but a lot of businesses now have to sell through the CFO, and you have to be ready to engage in that sales part of the sales process, and be able to sell to a CFO.
I've got one more here from Stuart in the chat, a question regarding product readiness and localization. So the question is, did you have to deal with negotiating with product teams who needed or wanted a long runway to have a product that was ready for new markets? Any insight to help the organization be prepared for compromise? Sounds like you've managed a lot of this in your career potentially.
I'm doing it today. We're having those conversations in real time right now. You know, the thing that I love about the CPO that we have here is she's, brutally honest. She's like, look, product is your biggest constraint, period, end of story. And, she knows that. She's very well aware of that. And that will always be the case. I don't care if you have 20 engineers or 300 engineers. It's always going to be your biggest constraint and one of the longest poles in the tent when you're planning, expansion into a new vertical, a new segment, or a new geo. And they're all very similar. They all need product. And so, I think there's got to be alignment at the top, right? Like I think about like we use, value creation plans. You can call them operating plans or key work streams that are the core growth drivers of the business. And you have to be aligned. If we say, look, one of our key growth strategies and, biggest rocks that we're going to move this year is going into this vertical or going into this market, then you got to get aligned at the top, and then you got to align the rest of it. That goes back into that prioritization, but you're absolutely going to negotiate and absolutely let product dictate what that timeline is going to be. And then push them, stress test them. They're always going to add that, buffer in like anybody would, but you've got to get real and have those real conversations. But, we've certainly screwed those up and had, sales resources and marketing efforts sitting on the sidelines because we're not quite ready from a product perspective. And then, then you're just wasting time and resources. But alignment at the top and prioritization, because if you're not aligned at the top and, somebody, a sales manager thinks you're going to go into a vertical and they start that action and, the rest of the organization's not aligned, then it's going to end up in disaster.
Adam, thank you again.
Thanks, Erica. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time. Hope it was useful. And yeah, again, intent was to leave behind a bunch of deeper content and just go through at a high level some of the core levers that you have on your journey. Good luck on the scaling journey to all of you.